Chapter 8 is looking at class, race, gender, and life chances. It was Max Weber that introduced the concept of life chances in connection with social classes to focus attention on the comprehensive consequences of social class. He explained life chances as the typical chances for a supply of goods, external living conditions, and personal life experiences. Your text talks a little bit about crime, the poor people of color, especially American Indians and men, are the greatest risks for victimization. Class and race combine to produce the very highest rates of the victimization among poor members of all racial and ethnic groups. African Americans comprise a disproportionate share of our prison populations, and statistics does show that the poor are more likely than the more affluent to be detained, arrested, and charged, convicted, and if convicted, to be sentenced to prison. Racial profiling, this is targeting people for heightened law enforcement security based on their race. White-collar crimes, these are offenses that are committed by people acting in their legitimate occupational roles. These crimes can only be committed by people in positions of authority and trust. Looking at health, among the medical conditions and risks unevenly distributed in societies are asthma, certain kinds of cancers, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, homicides, infant mortality, and psychological distress. Some of the explanations for the stratification of health care. One is socioeconomic conditions such as poverty. 2, the availability of health insurance. 3, the access to medical facilities. 4, treatment by healthcare professionals. 5, unequal safety and health risk on the job. And then, of course, variations in lifestyles. There are discrepancies in treatment as far as cardiac care. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in industrial nations around the world. As far as infant mortality, there is a combination of low birth weight and a lack of prenatal care that accounts for a disproportionate share of the deaths among infants. Education, in a study of elite American prep schools, it was found that preppies develop close ties to their classmates, ties that often last throughout life and become part of a network that they can draw upon as they rise to positions of power and wealth. Politics, the poor and members of the working class are more likely to vote for Democratic candidates. The upper and middle class voters are more likely to vote for Republican candidates. Studies have found that 48% of working class respondents believe that some difference in levels of income is desirable to sustain people's motives to achieve. Certainly members of all classes tend to agree that whatever differences there are ought to be based on individual achievement rather than on advantages inherited at birth. Make sure you know that. Members of the working class and poor are more likely than members of other classes to vote for candidates who oppose measures that would increase equality of opportunity. Looking at some occupational safety and health hazards, or certainly one that your textbook goes over is stress. Lower white-collar and blue-collar workers are the most likely to experience stress and consequently be at heightened risk of heart disease. As far as workplace violence, working class and lower middle class people are most vulnerable because their work routines expose them to crime, usually robberies. Lifestyles, certainly upper middle class persons appear to reduce unhealthy lifestyles. The poor are less likely to engage in preventive care, and men tend to participate in lifestyles that involve more risk than women, such as high-risk occupations and high-risk behaviors. Looking at environmental justice, here they're concerned with identifying and addressing the potentially adverse health effects of governmental and commercial actions on minority and low-income populations.